On April 25th, a list of 131 products eligible for potential tax exemption began circulating widely across Chinese social media, business networks, and trade organizations. The list includes items like semiconductors, vaccines, medical devices, ethene, and other chemical raw materials, as well as advanced technologies such as jet engines. CNN and sources from Shenzhen traders reported that Chinese customs have quietly lifted the 125% punitive tariff on certain U.S. semiconductor products, specifically integrated circuit chips, excluding storage chips under 8 tariff codes. These products now only face a 13% value-added tax. One Shanghai-based company even received notice that it could apply for a refund on tariffs overpaid between April 10th and 24th. Further reports from Reuters revealed that the Chinese Ministry of Commerce has set up a task force to gather goods that may qualify for these exemptions and is actively encouraging businesses to submit applications. Bloomberg added that Beijing is considering expanding the exemption to cover medical equipment, ethane, and even taxes on airplane leasing. This move is widely interpreted as a temporary measure for the Chinese Communist Party to ease the strain on businesses, signaling the significant toll the ongoing trade war is taking on China's economy. Michael Hart, chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce in China, confirmed that some chamber members had not been charged new tariffs on imported goods in the past week, indicating that the exemption policy has already started to be implemented. According to South Korea's newspaper Jun'an Ilbo, on the morning of April 24th, a senior official from China's Ministry of Finance led a delegation of around 10 people into the U.S. Department of the Treasury building near the White House for secret talks. Although the official's identity was not disclosed, processed photos were published, showing a Chinese official strongly preventing media photography and demanding reporters delete their photos, highlighting the sensitivity of the event. This incident confirms U.S. President Trump's statement during an interview on April 23rd, claiming that the U.S. and China are in direct communication every day regarding trade issues. But despite multiple pieces of evidence showing that China has started reducing tariffs and engaging in talks, its official stance continues to deny these developments, maintaining a tough stance. At a regular press conference on April 24th, CCP spokesperson He Yadong said,
目前中美之间未进行任何经贸谈判。
Right now, there haven't been any trade talks between China and the US. Any claims about progress in trade negotiations are just rumors with no factual basis.
At another press briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Guo Jiaqun also stated there have been no consultation or negotiations between China and the US regarding tariffs, let alone an agreement. He called reports on the matter fake news. Trump quickly countered the CCP's denials. On April 24th, during a meeting with Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre at the White House, he told the media that just that morning China and the US had held talks and that the US had been in continuous talks with China. Notably, on April 25th, the CCP's Politburo held a meeting to discuss coordinating domestic economic work and international economic and trade struggles, proposing more proactive macroeconomics policies to address the current situation. This statement reflects the growing concern within the CCP leadership over the negative impact of the trade war on China's economy. Soon after, more explosive news came to light. In an interview with the Time magazine on April 25th, Trump revealed that Xi Jinping had personally called him and emphasized that he wouldn't have made the call if Xi hadn't reached out first. Trump said, "He called, and I don't think that's a sign of weakness on his behalf." He further predicted that within 3 to 4 weeks, the U.S. would reach a new deal with trade partners and emphasized that tariff policies are based on thorough intelligence, setting fair tax rates for different countries. Gordon Chang, a senior fellow at the U.S. think tank Gatestone Institute, pointed out on Fox Business Channel's Varney & Co. program on April 25th that the CCP is quietly granting tariff exemptions on U.S. goods without publicly announcing them to avoid acknowledging compromise. He analyzed that China's economy is facing challenges such as negative consumer and producer product indices, shrinking GDP, and a decline in tax revenues for the first quarter of 2025. He warned that the prolonged trade war will exacerbate these problems. After holding firm against US tariffs, the world is now closely watching when China and the US will begin negotiations, especially when the leaders of the two countries will speak. All the signs suggest that not only are the US and China talking, but China has already started to make substantial concessions. In other words, while Xi Jinping appears tough on the surface, he has effectively softened his stance. However, the CCP continues its traditional approach of maintaining a strong verbal front. On April 28th, during a regular press conference by the CCP's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a Phoenix TV reporter mentioned President Trump's statement that Xi Jinping had called him. In response, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Gao Jiachun said,
据我了解，近期两国元首没有通话。
From what I understand, the two leaders haven't had any calls recently. I want to emphasize that China and the US have not had any consultations or negotiations on the tariff issue.
So the question arises, if China is quietly reducing tariffs and compromising, why won't the CCP admit it? Since it has Xi Jinping who made the call and China's officials have already visited Washington for talks, why does the CCP continue to deny it? On April 23rd, Wu Ting, a Chinese-American deputy political counselor at the US mission of the United Nations, accurately summed up the situation in her speech at the Security Council.
中国言行不一，说一套，做一套。
China's actions don't match its words. Senior commentator Wang Youchun analyzed that the CCP denies US-China negotiations for three reasons. First, it's about preserving face. The CCP refuses to admit the negotiations with the US to protect the image of being great, glorious, and correct. Faced with Trump's reciprocal tariffs, China openly opposed and retaliated, but was forced to negotiate privately due to international isolation. Publicly acknowledging this would damage its reputation, so the CCP continues to deny it. Second, it's about prioritizing power. The CCP places the security of its regime first. Domestically, it must maintain an image of strength, no concessions, and fighting to the end. Admitting any goodwill towards the US could be seen as weakness or surrender, which would upset the domestic population, fuel internal power struggles, and weaken the CCP's control. Therefore, the CCP continues to deny negotiations to show its determination to fight the US and maintain authority over the Chinese people. Third, the CCP has a habitual tendency to lie. Having ruled for 76 years through repression and deception, the CCP's propaganda machine is skilled at distorting the truth. Even after Trump and South Korean media exposed evidence of the talks, the CCP continued to deny negotiations, attempting to conceal the truth. So why is the CCP now showing signs of compromise? The primary reason is economic pressure. US tariffs of 145% have caused Chinese exports to the US market to collapse. According to the Financial Times, the volume of 20-foot standard container bookings on China-US routes fell by 45% in mid-April. And the ports of Los Angeles expects a one-third drop in container volume by early May. Major export hubs like Yiwu and Dongguan have seen widespread factory shutdowns, with industries such as toys, sports goods, and low-cost consumer products bearing the brunt. Order losses, stockpile buildup, and broken supply chains have left countless factories in dire straits, spreading like a virus across the country. Experts warn that this wave of collapse will eventually lead to a structural crisis in China's manufacturing sector, triggering mass unemployment and a supply chain crisis. On top of that, some industries in China are also highly dependent on key imports from the US. For example, the core material for China's plastic industry, ethane, is 98% imported from the US. If the US cuts off supply, China's plastic industry could be paralyzed. The semiconductor and aerospace industries are also heavily affected, with key parts for the C919 aircraft, such as engines and landing gear, relying on US imports. A supply disruption would severely damage these industries. In the long run, the trade war is extremely detrimental to the CCP. The longer it drags on, the more foreign businesses will move their supply chain to countries like Vietnam, India, and Mexico, or even back to the US. Moreover, the trend of deglobalization exacerbating the CCP's difficulties. Countries like Vietnam and Thailand are strictly cracking down on transshipment trade, and India has imposed a 12% tariff on steel to prevent Chinese products from flooding the market. The CCP has attempted to rally up support from Africa, Asian, and Latin American countries through UN meetings, announcing zero tariffs on the least developed countries, but their trade volumes have little impact on China's economy and cannot reverse the downturn. The EU has also shown indifference to the CCP's attempt to gain support, indicating its increasing isolation on the international stage. On April 25th, Trump told reporters aboard Air Force One that he would not lift tariffs on Chinese goods unless the CCP makes substantial concessions. He called for China to fully open its market to allow US products to enter freely, which would mean state-owned and central enterprises would have to compete fairly with American companies. For inefficient, monopolistic, state-owned enterprises, this would be a fatal blow, with bankruptcy almost inevitable. These enterprises are the financial lifeblood of CCP elites and the economic pillars of its rule, and their collapse would shake the foundation of CCP power. Furthermore, a fair and open market environment conflicts fundamentally with the CCP's centralized system. After industrial civilization matures, the public will inevitably demand rights and political reform, something the CCP's regime cannot tolerate. Therefore, under internal and external pressure, the CCP's private compromise and concessions on tariff may be a temporary solution. However, there is another view circulating in Chinese-speaking circles regarding Xi Jinping's apparent submission. Current affair commentator Fang Wei has put forward a widely discussed opinion. China's compromise is not only due to economic pressure, but is closely tied to internal power struggles. According to his sources, Xi Jinping's power has significantly weakened after the CCP's 20th Central Committee third plenary session in 2024 due to health issues. Fang Wei revealed that Xi Jinping had fallen into a coma for over 10 days due to a health crisis, during which CCP elders like Wen Jiabao, Zhu Rongji, and Hu Jintao, along with current vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, Zhang Youxia, seized power and stripped Xi Jinping of his military and political authority. Although Xi Jinping remains in the public eye, he has effectively become a puppet, with decision-making power resting in the hands of the CCP elders. This was evidenced by the recent public humiliation of Xi Jinping by the wife of former Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. If Xi had not lost power, it's hard to imagine that someone with significant interest in China like Lee's wife would dare to behave this way. Fang Wei pointed out that the CCP's recent quiet reduction on tariff is an action taken by the party elders to address the economic crisis. The CCP recently replaced its international trade representative with the new representative Li Chenggang, who is aligned with the new power faction, engaging in secret talks with the US. However, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Commerce, which are controlled by Xi Jinping, were not involved, leading to the public denial of the negotiations. This also explains why Trump stated that these two sides talk every day, while the CCP continues to deny it. Fang Wei also mentioned that the change in the CCP's internal propaganda aligns with a shift in power. In the Politburo meeting reports, Xi Jinping's signature slogans such as "two establishes" and "two safeguards" have disappeared, indicating that his influence has been deliberately minimized. At the same time, Li Keqiang's six stabilization policy was reintroduced, signaling that the party elders are trying to return to an economy-first approach. However, the newer power faction has not yet clarified its future direction, and there is no willingness to take responsibility for the challenges created under Xi Jinping's leadership. As a result, economic diplomacy is still officially handled by Xi, bearing all the risk and shame. Renowned commentator Tang Jingyuan has expressed similar views. In a recent video, he pointed out that the anti-Xi forces strategy for dealing with the crisis is to push Xi Jinping to the forefront, whether he acts as a wolf warrior offending others or compromising. He is left to bear the consequences. Success means shared benefits, but failure is solely his responsibility, and he could even be discarded as a scapegoat. Xi Jinping, once an ambitious leader of the center with great potential, is now reduced to the fate of a puppet, a result entirely of his own making. Recently famous financial blogger Lao Man analyzed in a YouTube video that the US-China trade war is a result of a series of misjudgments. Both the US and China made significant strategic errors. However, these misjudgments led to vastly different outcomes. The US's misjudgment resulted in an early confrontation, but it has led to a very positive outcome for the US. In contrast, China's misjudgment led to a premature collapse of its economy, a situation that the Chinese government cannot withstand. The biggest mistake made by the Trump administration was overestimating China's strength. In recent years, China has rapidly grown in fields such as military, aerospace, and new energy, appearing to thrive. At the same time, China has used checkbook diplomacy in Africa and Latin America, providing endless financial support to these countries in exchange for their backing on the international stage. For these external indicators, China's economy appeared to be very strong, even invincible. However, what Trump did not know was that China's economy had already been drained by a 20-year real estate bubble. The top 2% of the red elite controls 82% of the wealth, while the wealth gap has become unquantifiable. The 1.3 billion ordinary Chinese people have no social security for healthcare or pensions and lack any real purchasing power. China's economy is highly dependent on exports, with 40% of its industrial products needing to be exported. Additionally, 16% of industrial products must be sold directly or indirectly to the US. Therefore, China lacks the ability to face a full-scale economic slowdown with the US. The Trump administration's premature confrontation with the CCP at the exact moment when China's economy and politics were at their most vulnerable has put the Chinese government in an awkward position with no viable response. China's biggest mistake was underestimating Trump's determination to change the status quo. Since the 1950s, the US has maintained global peace and prosperity for 70 years by exporting purchasing power. But this model has come at a high cost. First, depleting gold reserves 1950s to 1970s, and later relying on debt printing 1970s to 2020s, with national debt soaring to 36 trillion US dollars, and interest accounting for 20% of fiscal revenue, making it unsustainable. Moreover, the US industry has hollowed out. The Rust Belt has suffered bankruptcies, and the public discontent has grown. Trump's election was a response to public opinion. Leading an anti-China cabinet, Trump is determined to end globalization and establish a new set of rules, while reshaping American manufacturing. Therefore, the US government is not likely to back down on tariffs with China. China, on the other hand, was completely ignorant of the US situation. China's state media continuously reported that Trump had backed down and that there was infighting among US officials. These false stories amused the Chinese public. They kept imagining that the US would surrender the next day, automatically reducing tariffs to zero. China misjudged Trump's resolve, relying only on rhetoric and false propaganda without any real strategies. Lau Man believes that by 2025, China's economy will be on the brink of a collapse, with bankruptcies, rising unemployment, debt crisis, and social unrest risk nearing 100%. The central bank's unanchored money printing will be ineffective as the financial order collapses. However, economic collapse and social unrest are China's reckoning. Only through experiencing chaos will the Chinese people have a chance to reflect and rebuild a new order from the ruins. Perhaps this is the real turning point for China, a nation that reeks of decay. In conclusion, the CCP's current private compromise is merely a temporary concession in the trade war, unable to change its long-term economic and political decline. Behind this compromise lies a deeper crisis within the CCP's regime. Whether Xi Jinping continues as a puppet or a new power faction takes over, the CCP will struggle to find a way out under mounting internal and external pressures. As Lau Man suggests, economic collapse and social unrest may provide the opportunity for China to rebuild, but this process will inevitably be painful.